We're live.
We are live.
Welcome to the Engineering Reason podcast and live show. Welcome, everyone. I'm Deb from The Reason We Learn, and this is Kevin from Engineering Politics.
How you guys doing tonight?
This is your first time. Make
Yeah.
sure you check out Kevin's podcast, right? Engineering Politics.
Yeah.
And he's also got a locals community.
Do engineeringpolitics.locals.com. Come there. You'll see a lot of the podcasts I'm doing lately. I do a lot of book reviews, especially lately. Deep dives into latest book that we're doing. I'm doing it with another creator, Truman from Return to Reason. If you know my stuff, you'll probably know his stuff. But we're reviewing F.A. Hayek's book, The Road to Serfdom. We're nearing the end of that book, but it's been a great adventure. And as I wrote earlier this week, because it's been crazy. It's been a crazy week. I know I'm going to say right before we jump into it today, it's like, oh, what are we going to talk about? Don't quite know. And it's like, yeah, I've had barely time to think of anything else outside of work. So coming up with something interesting, although I think we always come up with something interesting while we're on this talk. And it certainly helps when you people listening are adding into the chat. But, you know, a lot of my time's been outside of work has been diving into this book and doing a new history lesson that we're doing lately. True and I were both very surprised by how little we know about history, especially outside of the U.S. You know, I was never a history buff. I was never someone who could just regurgitate historical facts very easily. But I figured, you know, since I actually know that Benjamin Franklin was not a president of the United States, I already figure I'm in the top 90th percentile of history buffs in America, which is sad.
Well, that puts you ahead of most of the rappers out there, doesn't
it? Exactly.
So,
So I've been diving into a lot of history lately and, keep myself busy.
Cool. So what are we going to talk about tonight, Kevin? What did we decide?
So today I figured, since we do a lot, I think every conversation we've had so far has mostly been about K through 12 education. Extremely vital, extremely important. I have young children. You have young children go through the system. A lot of the listeners out there, judging by the questions they ask and how they just interact during the show, it seems like they're looking for the same answers that I'm looking for through here. And I think that it would make sense because the natural next step for a lot of these kids going K through 12 is what they're getting pushed into is, higher education. And I think that's something that we need to talk about a little bit, because just as K through 12 is a complete dumpster fire right now, I don't know if we think higher ed is better or worse than it is right now. But the better thing I think about higher ed is it seems you have more options. I mean, you have the option to not do it at all, right? You have the option to do a lot of different things, a lot of different avenues to build your own career. But it seems like something that is demanded by our society, that if you don't at least go to college, you don't even have to get an education, or you don't have to get a degree, which is the sad part. Like I know of anyone I know of who went to college but didn't get a degree. It's like, okay, you're acceptable in society. That's fine. But for those for those people who just didn't go to college at all, they're looked down upon like, why you didn't go to college? It's not good enough for you. You're not smart enough. Like what's your deal? And it's just this thing pushed down by society that's absolutely not necessary. Just as a general rule, you don't have to go to any secondary education or formal education. And when you do, there's a lot of options. A 4-year university is not the only option there, just as public education K through 12 is not the only option there. So I kind of want to tease that a little bit and get your opinion on that.
Yeah, well, let's look at this. What Alaric says. Correction. Higher indoctrination. Yeah, it's so you got the K-12 indoctrination, and then you get higher. I have been interested in this topic for a long time, and not just because I now have a daughter of age to consider going to college next year, but because I went to college and I went to grad school. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I think it was, for the most part, a waste of time and money. And I say that having enjoyed my years in college, not grad school, hated it, but my 4 years in college, I spent 1 year abroad. That was my favorite year. But I had some great professors. I learned a lot in the classroom with those good professors. I enjoyed everything I read. I enjoyed, the learning part. The part of college where you have the college experience, I thought was a complete waste. And, threatened to drag me back in terms of maturity, which is part of why I didn't participate in it. So I didn't have much of a social life. But when all was said and done, I just knew more things I could talk about, at a cocktail party or here, or, I had a lot of topics I had sort of a dilettante's knowledge of. Okay. I wasn't an expert in anything after college. I majored in American studies. So that was obviously fascinating to me. I read a lot of history, but I learned most of the history I know well after college. So after I was done and I realized they just kind of gave me this surface, it was sort of like K-12 on steroids. Even though I went to a really good school by everybody's estimation, I still had to come out and read things, read books by people like Thomas Sowell, read books like, the things I've read from Brad Thompson and others, Barbara Tuchman, people like that. I didn't read that in college. Most of the real history scholarship I read out of college. So I guess you could say it got me more interested, but did I really need to do that there? The year of traveling and, learning abroad and things like that, I probably could have done that without going to college, without doing it under the auspices of a college. So, some people say, well, how lucky for you, you can say that. But was it though? I delayed entering the workforce for 4 years. I had no better idea what I wanted to do with my life. It actually created a lot of stress because I felt sort of guilty. Like I spent 4 years in school and now I'm, 21 years old and I don't have a job. I have no skills. I have, I don't want to teach. I didn't want to teach then. And even when I decided to teach, they said, you have to get more education because you didn't major in education, which is a whole other video. But so I've always looked at college, my whole adult life, as something that was sold. I was sold a bill of goods is how I described it in my 20s. I would tell people, I feel like I was sold a bill of goods. I feel like I was promised something, if not explicitly, implicitly, like go to college, get good grades, come out, and like there'd be somebody standing there with, here's your job, here's your job, it doesn't work like that. And I don't know why. It just like didn't sink into like senior year. Oh yeah, I got to graduate and go to work and earn money and pay bills, right? And so it felt like 4 years of delaying adulthood a little longer in terms of liberal arts college. Now, that's not everybody's experience. People who went to college, even in my generation, who didn't go to liberal arts college necessarily, went to a university, maybe they went down a career path or went to more of a like an engineering school, for example, or they learned something very specific that put them on a pathway to a certification or grad school, they become a doctor, whatever. They knew what they wanted to do. So for them, it was completely appropriate. But understand something, I was never given the opportunity to think about any other options. It was, you go to prep school. I went to prep school for 3 years in high school. It was like, and then of course you go to college. It was like, you breathe in and out. The sun comes up in the east, it goes down in the west, and you go to college. It was just how it is. And years later, when I decided I'm going to try something else completely different and go be a pastry chef. And my dad, who always knew that I loved to cook, I taught myself to cook at the age of 10. He's like, oh, that's something you could have done. You could have gone to the Culinary Institute, become a chef. I'm like, now you tell me. I'm 30 years old, and now you tell me that this might have been something you would have, supported. No idea. So I guess I feel like it's been a long time coming that we, as parents, as a nation, et cetera, have a conversation about what is the purpose of college, who should go, who should not go. Why do we insist that there's this social thing of like everyone should go to college or university when that's just demonstrably false? Like it just isn't really a good deal, especially when you have to pay for it yourself, which is increasingly the case because of the cost of it. So
what do you think now, especially that, K through 12 is meant to prepare you for the real world, also meant to prepare you for this type of education, secondary education. With these K through 12 schools, you're now less prepared, I suppose, more prepared for some of these colleges, depending on where you go. I think some of these poor public education schools might prepare you really well for like an Evergreen, but not well for, MIT.
Yeah. Right.
So there's actually a pretty good, actually, before I move on to there, I think you tripped upon a good thing, and it's something I believe I heard from James Lindsay on one of his only subs the other day, when he talked about he had talking to two people, both of them went to Ivy League college, or it may have been one guy who went to two Ivy League colleges. And he talked about how it's embarrassing now. It used to be like this badge of honor. If you go to Harvard, it's like, I have a Harvard degree. This is a badge of honor now. But now it's seen as more embarrassing by them. And they actually, like, they say there's some way that they should be able to sue the school, because now the worth, the value of the education, even though they got it, decades ago, has been depreciated in value because of how awful it is now, and how poorly it's looked upon it, right now. And that's not to say the kids who actually are going through it right now and getting the bad education. But if, let's assume that K through 12 actually prepared you for the real world properly. Do you still think that most, let's say, 18-year-olds coming out of high school should go to university? Should they take, a couple years off? Or is it just more of a case-by-case basis? Like, what would you think? Let's, again, assuming K through 12 actually prepared you for the real world like it ought to. Do you think most people should still be going to university?
No. Oh, no. I mean, I would say if K through 12 did what it was supposed to do, okay, I think maybe, in today's world, and definitely less than half. And I would actually say conservatively 25-30% belong at college or university. And I'd say the rest, if K-12 were doing its job, could and should be able to avail themselves of either some kind of a professional certification program and go get a job, or go straight to work, or go apprentice, or do something in the trades directly. I think we should bring back apprenticeship, because you'd have the skills you need. You'd have what you need. If K-12 did its job, you'd have what you need to go straight to work in an apprenticeship for a trade. And, you're young enough, you have energy, and maybe you've been still living at home. Like, you still have that luxury of, like, I don't have to pay rent just yet, so I can make a little less money while I'm learning on the job. And then when I demonstrate that I am effective, and then they can pay me and so forth. I think that would be better, because really the number of people who need that higher level of education for credentialing purposes, and we're talking doctors, lawyers, scientists, people who have to work at a level where they're not just learning for themselves, but they're preparing to do research, or they're preparing to go and do things like cut people open, maybe. And even lawyers, I'll be honest, I think a law school is a big, scam, in the sense that you don't really even need a building. Because now that they're not using the law library with the books anymore, I mean, everything's online, right? What do you really need? Why do you need a big school? You don't need a lot of buildings. You don't need a library anymore. Everything is digitized. If you want to have a paper library, fine. So you need a library. Okay. But lecture halls and all that, even so, you don't need lab equipment. The cost of it is astronomical. And from what my dad even told me, he went to Harvard Law School back in the 50s. He said, your first year, you're learning some things. Your second year, you're beginning to figure out, can I be in the law review? And by your third year, you're just doing interviews. And if you didn't make it to the law review by the time you were, second year, then you probably weren't going to. And I mean, it was just like the amount of time you spent actually learning anything was not 3 years. Okay. There was a lot more going on in the 3 years. Now, some people might argue with me, but I think, but my point is, in our modern society, the number of jobs for which you need to spend 4 whole years tucked away in a school they're going like this. There aren't as many of them. That doesn't mean we don't need lots of doctors or nurses or, people like that. We do. But first of all, you don't need to go to 4-year college to be a nurse. Do you? You really don't. They have nursing programs are a completely separate animal, or to be a PA, or to be a hospitalist, or to be a lab tech, people like that. Okay, so go into these programs. So 25-30% maybe need to go to college. And I would prefer if we close down the education schools completely. If you want to know my fantasy, they shouldn't exist. There shouldn't be something called a grad ed at University of Pennsylvania, where I went. That place should not exist. What should have happened was, if the state of Pennsylvania needed me to pass some test to go teach, in an elementary school, which is where I taught. They should have told me, go prepare for this test. Here are the laws you have to learn. Here are the procedures you need to memorize, and then sit for the test. Massachusetts did that with high school English. I had a bachelor's degree in American Studies. I said, I think I'd like to get certified to teach high school English. Actually, I got certified for both middle and high school. They said, okay, come pass the test. So I did. Now, I'll say the test was ridiculously easy, and that was sort of a shame. But why do you need to have people go pay for a bunch more school? The only class that was of value to me, which they could have required me to take as a course, and I think they should have, was child development. It's the only one that was of any value to me, is like, how do children grow and develop and learn? Beyond that, the rest of it was indoctrination. Here's how we would like you to teach social studies. Here's how we would like you to teach math. Here's how we would like you to teach these things. And I'm like, most of the time in my classes, I was like, why? It made no sense. So, whole bunch of money, whole bunch of time for what? So they can pass off the latest fad as, develop these new fad programs. I think it was a complete waste. And every time they send me the bulletin and I open it up and I look at it, it proves me right in that opinion. I'm like, you are what's wrong with education. I'm embarrassed to have ever gone to your school. That's University of Pennsylvania. That's an Ivy League school. So that's my answer. Very tiny percentage.
Yeah. So there's this common, what I would probably call myth. We talked a little bit about going live, but the talking point that colleges and universities are becoming, fat and corrupt because of the free market structures that allow it to cater the supply for this demand for these alternative, underwater basket weaving type of degrees that don't make any sense. There's no applicability to the real world. And a lot of people argue it's the free market that allows those types of majors to thrive and prosper. What would you say to that? What would you say? Should we regulate this and make sure and go in and say, okay, we no longer are allowed to have this, and this degree? Or, what else is in the system that is causing all of these BS degrees to start to,
well, it's just the infusion
of the university.
It's just the infusion of cash. I mean, if you stop, the government shouldn't be a bank, first of all. Okay, that's completely ridiculous, because even a bank, if it makes an investment, if it lends money, it's making an investment in something, right? Typically, there's a thing at the end of it, like a house you can foreclose on and then sell. Like, there's something tangible that if you put your money in, you're like, okay, if this investment doesn't go so well, we can, shift things around. The risk is mitigated by the fact that there's something tangible. Education is, it's like you can't touch it. You can't hold it in your hands. It is not quantifiable. So, that you talked about the Harvard grads who are like, oh, my degree is worth less. And it's all intangible stuff from up here. So the government, I know, or if a regular bank wouldn't want to invest in your education, if they would see it as a poor investment, then they likely wouldn't do it, right? Or at a minimum, if you defaulted on it, you could declare bankruptcy, and then, there'd be a whole restructuring, whatever. But when the government does it, not only do they have a bottomless pit of money because they can just keep printing more, right? Let's just print more. But the incentive to worry about whether you're going to get a return is non-existent. They don't have shareholders. They don't have a board of directors. They don't have anybody to answer to. People say, oh, they have us voters. Do they though? Really? Like, they don't have any accountability. So,
and also, if you declare bankruptcy, I don't believe you can.
You can't.
That doesn't,
You can't.
affect your federal loans.
No, you can't. So it's they create this demand with this culture that says you need to do this or you're, lesser person, right? You won't be in the elite. You can't get into the elite if you don't have this college degree, unless you're very, very lucky kind of entrepreneur who, you're a Bill Gates or you're an Elon Musk or somebody like that. Okay. And there are others who've just made it really big. I mean, entertainers, actors, people like that, and sports stars. But a lot of athletes go to college too, so even they get credit for having gone to college. But I think making the government a bank, having this giant infusion of cash, that now, and the social, and those two things came together to create this insane demand for something they could study at these schools that they'd be capable of passing. Okay, so you got to believe all of these people are not able to go, major in physics or math or engineering or whatever they're going to major in. And we've even degraded some of the majors, like if you want to be an agricultural major, right, and you want to major in things like that. If you don't live in an area with farms and you don't already come out of that world, you're not going to grow up in New York City and decide, I think I'm going to go to an Aggie school and I'm going to major in agriculture. I mean, you might, but it's unlikely, right? So where do most people live? Most people live in urban areas, and they are going to go to college and they're not thinking of majoring even in trades. How often do they come in contact with people like that? They want to work in an office, so they're going to work in whatever. Plus, the cost of living is so insanely high. They think they have to work in these kinds of jobs, white collar jobs that pay a lot of money. And they've had extremely poor college counseling in their high school, done by people who haven't worked probably a day in the real world. And their parents are just going along with whatever the so-called experts say. And they go to college, and they're not scholars. They're not academically inclined to do the work there. So they create these Mickey Mouse majors. I think it was, who was it? It was Alaric. He said it too. He called them Mickey Mouse. Yeah, here it is. He says the desire of everyone to go to university has allowed Mickey Mouse subjects to exist. Apprenticeships have been highly successful in Australia and is well supported by the government. Like, we need things like that. Mickey Mouse majors, just to be clear. All the ones that end in studies, and I say that even as an American studies major, but in my defense, when I majored in American studies, they just called it that because you had a very clear, you had 5 courses from the literature, like English department. You had 5 courses from the history department. It was tailor-made for people like me who were like, I can't decide history or English. I can't decide. I love them both. So you have 5 from each. And then you have to take 5 other courses from the college, but they must be America focused. They have to, if there was research done, it has to have been done in America. If it was, if it's art, it has to be American art. So you could take courses, but it had to be American. And so I took a fair amount of art history because I was very interested in the American Decorative Arts. I thought maybe I'd go be a curator at a museum or something. That didn't pan out. Then I thought maybe I'd be some kind of a journalist or something. That didn't pan out. Because once I found out what those jobs really entailed, I was like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. And then we had seminars. So each year you had a seminar. Now, the way they structured the seminars was a decade, because American history is in decades. Mm-hmm. And it was interdisciplinary in the sense that you look at the decade and it as a total thing. So we did the 20s. You're looking at history, economics, psychology, sociology, so some social science, and reading primary sources and looking at, film and music and all the things from the decade, so you could get a really deep understanding of what made that decade unique or what made it special. How did it impact the rest of American history, or how was it impacted from the period before, and so forth. So I loved it. It was super fun. But so what? So what at the end of the day? But things like even some of the business majors, they're not accounting majors. That might give you a skill. It's business. Well, what the frick is business as a major, right? You're not out on the ground like doing business. You're like learning what business. I mean, from people.
So unless your family owns a business and you're about to go and head up that business, that's the only way that I can see that's somewhat applicable. But yes, I know a lot of colleges that business was kind of there where you're in flux. I went to an engineer. I went to a pretty prestigious engineering school. It was really good, and because it was just engineers, there was no woke BS and stuff like that. So it was a really good school. But we had a business degree there, and that's kind of what engineers who found it too hard to be in this kind of engineering went to there for a little bit, and then went back into a different discipline,
right?
Or major when
right,
they're able to get their head above water.
And even Stephen Hicks told me that a lot of the people going into the ed schools are people who went to college thinking, oh, I was a good math student in high school. I think I'll major in math. Or, I was pretty good at science. I'll go major in science or something. And then they realize, oh, no, pretty good, or that was my best subject, is not going to cut it as a major. Like to spend 4 years diving deep into mathematics or science or whatever. So that didn't work. So now I was like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to go teach math. which is kind of scary, isn't it? Like, I can't cut it as a math major, so I'm going to go teach math. And that's
Makes
what he
sense.
told me. He said that's what's happening is that kids are kind of falling out of the core subjects and then switching over to the ed department to become teachers of the subjects they couldn't do as a major. And one of the worst is English. And then of course people go major in English and they realize after they've gotten there, what the heck am I going to do with this? All you can do really is teach, unless you're going to write. I mean, you could write, I suppose, but if you want to make a living, what are you going to do? So there doesn't seem to be a connection between the high schools advising these kids to go to college, or parents, or the culture, or whatever, and what the hell are you going to do with that major? There's no one in between. And when you get past 12th grade, that is a really important question. And especially if you're borrowing money, because you have to do the math. I told my daughter to do this. I said, all right, let's work backwards. What kind of life do you want to lead? Where do you want to live? A city? You want to live in a town? You want to live in a rural area? Okay, that defines your cost of living. Do you want to be a mom? Do you want to stay home with your kids or not? Let's talk about it. You can be 18 years old in the fall. I mean, theoretically, this could happen in the next 4 or 5 years. So if this is something that's on your agenda, if this is how you want your life to go, you envision your vision board as like, I want to be a mom and have kids. Okay, what jobs facilitate that? Enable you to stay home for X amount of years, or be part-time, or, what kind of jobs allow that? How many jobs require you to live in a city? Like, you're not, she thought for a while, I would think I want to work as a crime scene, investigator. And my dream is to work at the BAU. Right? I've watched all the shows. She loves that
My
stuff.
little sister was the exact same way. That's
right. I'm like, super. So you want to live where you want to go to Quantico, and you want to live in Washington, D.C. for, or get assigned to live in some who the heck knows where they're going to pick you up and move you every couple of years because that's where they're sending you at that time, or who knows. And OPS, only this tiny, tiny handful of people makes it into the BAU. And first you have to be in the FBI, which means first you have to risk death. So, there's like, are you sure you want to do this? And suddenly it was like, what? Right? It's all very glamorous until you realize there's a whole job behind that. So working backwards helps. And when you realize, like, okay, the most I can expect to make at the job that will give me the life I want to lead, okay, put me in the size of a town, or the type of state I want to be in, and be a mom, or dad, and maybe I'll clear, 50, 60 grand a year. Like, let's just say for, and then you look at, okay, super. The cost of college, even at the local state university, is about $23,000 a year. So you have to borrow 100% of it. You have none of it. Okay. Or work your way through. So how are you going to pay that back on your little salary of, $50,000, $60,000 a year? How are you going to pull that off? You're looking at paying anywhere from $500 to $600 a month for the next 10 years. I mean, like, it's going to be huge. So do you really want that? Because then when you have kids, they're expensive. You want to buy a car. Oh, you need new air conditioning for your house? Oh, guess what? There's that's spoken for. You can't not pay it. Oh, P.S. the interest is growing. So that cost is just compounded. And suddenly it becomes very unattractive. But nobody has this conversation, except for Mike Rowe, maybe. Nobody has this conversation with the kids. And I think part of it is there's so much money right now. These colleges, we talked about before the show, they claim to be nonprofit. Oh, really? Do you now? I see. Okay. Nonprofit. How many people work for nonprofits, and maybe they show up to half their classes, but they have a graduate student teaching, the other half. They might make an appearance. They're busy writing a book. They're doing research, but they're making 6 figures.
Yeah.
And why is that again? Please.
It's not profit. Don't worry about it.
No, it's not profit. It's fine.
So one of the reasons that I brought up the subject is actually, I think a couple of weeks ago, or maybe sometime, maybe mid last month. I do this thing called the Ember Roundtable, and it's run by James Darien. He also has a locals community commutation construct and Ember's locals community, but it's kind of like a think tank where we have a monthly discussion between me, Truman of Return to Reason, James Darien, and Carlin Barasenko, where we talk about this, different topics every month, big topics. And one of the ones that I was in charge of last month was just coming up with a topic. And what I was thinking of is something that I didn't originally come up with. I think maybe Truman came up with it, but it's the idea of load-bearing structures of society. So these structures are not necessarily institutions. But the three structures we had in mind, and actually I have my notes here so I can kind of just repeat what to more flesh out what a load bearing structure of society is. So it comes from the idea of a load bearing wall, in your house. So which is a structure that holds up the weight of the building above it. The key features of a load bearing structure is it's not always easy to find. It's not always easy to tell when you're knocking down walls in your house. You always kind of want to figure out where's the load bearing walls first for you to go knock it down. And all of a sudden your top floor is sagging down. And another important part of a load bearing structure is there must be a solid foundation below it. If there's no foundation below it, then it's not going to be able to hold anything above it up, and that foundation cannot be removed, and the load bearing structure cannot be removed, or the whole building or the whole society will collapse. And there are many load bearing structures of society, and they're normally institutions or traditions that add value. And if structure is taken away, a society will quickly devolve into chaos. So the load bearing structures we came up with is one, comedy. That's a big one that people don't understand. Two is sports, another big one. And three is education. Education is the obvious one. There's institutions involved with it, so it's a lot easier to understand. And if we have time later, maybe we can dive into more comedy and sports. But the idea with a load bearing structure is because they can crumble if you have a temporary replacement, but it's only going to be temporary, and you have to rebuild that structure before everything above it falls down. So when you think of this in terms of education, now really here, there are two modes basically that you can fix this load bearing structure. There's the idea of stacking sandbags or building an arc. Stacking sandbags mean you're going to stay in the institution and fight from the inside, try to reform from the inside. Building an arc is mean you're gone. You're going to let the current institution crumble, and you're going to build your own really quickly before society falls. And we're at that point where in K through 12 we know we can kind of build an arc. There are other options out there. Homeschool is an option that you talk about a lot. Alternative schools are an option you talk about a lot, and it's great that we have those options, but there's something that's not quite as clear when it comes to secondary education, because it can be so broad, because you can be there's so many different avenues to get there. And I think you've talked about a lot of different ones. But if we're talking about the formal education schools, the especially graduate education schools, the studies schools that promote that type of degree, we can all get it out there and get out of it. We can let it burn. And I think there's this idea that if you let this institution burn down, it needs to be a controlled burn. We have these things called controlled burns that, you burn out an area and make sure that the fire is not going to go outside the perimeter in which you want it to. Mm-hmm. And we need to figure out, is there a way to leave? If we want to leave Harvard, is there a way to leave Harvard, let it burn down a little bit and be able to rebuild it before that fire, moves from Harvard to Yale to all the Ivy League schools, and down to, schools that are good, but not quite as good, and then down to all the way to community colleges. We don't want the fire to spread. So the hard part here is at what point do we just watch it burn and do nothing about it? There's obviously options to do alternatives, while having the institution burn, but there are obviously, skill sets like you talked about before: doctors, surgeons, nurses, engineers, scientists. There are these things that we cannot just let burn down, because in the meantime, we need those disciplines. We need those skill sets to be.
The good news is, just as if they'll allow it, it's not always possible, but just as there have been universities, or countries that have sent people here to go to university, there are still some universities around the world, and even a few here in the United States, that have not gone completely off the rails. So for the credentialing of people we need, like doctors and so forth, there are still places you can go for that have not complete, they're not in any danger of sort of burning down or getting too woke. I shouldn't say any danger. They're in danger, but they're not Harvard. And I think there are people working right now to try to shore them up. In other words, shore up the schools, the graduate schools we need the most in this load bearing system, the medical schools. They're in danger. Not gonna lie, they're in danger of this horrible ideology. But there are people pushing back really hard right now, and I'm fingers crossed. I have hope they will be more successful than the K-12 people, for precisely the reason you said. That I think there is a greater appreciation for the immediate necessity of having people who actually can perform surgery, and not kill you. So I'm hopeful there. But as far as the rest of it, I think we have to change the incentives. one thing nobody talks about, and I would love to see somebody in politics have the guts and the will to do this, is okay, it is arguable that students have been sold a bill of goods and that this whole system facilitated the debt they're in. In other words, the colleges, the college financial offices did not in any way counsel these 18-year-olds appropriately, and to assume that they're adults. So even if their parents had stepped in and said, like, I don't think that's a good idea, they still were legally able to contract. These adults, who we now know through research done by people like Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt, are probably closer to 15-year-olds 30 years ago than 18-year-olds in terms of their understanding of how the world works and maturity and basic background knowledge. They're sitting down and signing their future earnings away for an intangible, something they don't have, they can't even quantify. They don't even know what it's going to be. Like, I'll figure it out when I get there, what I want to study, what I want to be. I mean, that you said, should we outlaw it? I don't think we should. I don't like to ban things and outlaw things, but here's what I do think that somebody could do. They could put it back on the colleges to have skin in the game. If you're going to be this go-between, first of all, I think the government needs to get out of the lending business. I think it needs to go back to private lenders. But if the colleges still want to have a robust lending scheme and to keep their prices this insanely high level, they need to take to be a little more reliable for the product they're going to deliver. So if we had private lenders and then we told the colleges, here's the deal. Now it's private. They could default because they're unable to pay. So you need it's going to fall to you. If they do, you're going to have to own some of that debt. It's not going to fall to taxpayers. It's not going to be all on the bank because you're delivering an intangible. There's nothing the bank can repossess. There's nothing they can take at the end of it. They can't take the kid, So you claim you're going to deliver something that will facilitate the gainful employment of this person to pay it back. Otherwise, why are you charging so much? How do you know that it's worth that much? We charge in the free market, things cost what they're supposedly worth, what their value is. Well, if you tell someone the value of your college education is $70,000 a year, Amherst College, as an example, okay, or even Colby, my alma mater, is close to, I think it's $65,000, $70,000 at this point. It was like 13 when I went there. Well, how'd you arrive at that number? How'd you arrive at that figure? Is there any value basis to it? Because we know it doesn't cost $70,000 to educate that child, that adult, whatever, that person. Don't even go there. It doesn't cost $70,000. So you're value pricing it. You're telling us that it's worth that, and you don't even know what they're majoring in yet. You don't know what kind of grades they're going to get. You don't know if they're going to graduate. And yet, which is the missing link when it comes time for the kids going, it's a college debt bubble and you need to help us and bail us out. Nobody, the college is over here going, like, we're sitting on a pile of cash and it's not our problem. That is criminal. That needs to change. So if I were king, president, queen, whatever, that's one of the things I'd be pushing for. I'd be asking for some changes. I'd put the loan program back to the private lenders. Okay. And we just do Pell Grants and we do certain kinds of grants, but back to the lenders. And those would go to by merit, by the way. You wouldn't have the way they're done now. And then you, the college, want to price it that way. You're claiming that's the value. So stand by it. And if you can't get that kid there, you need to make a decision at the end of their freshman year. You need to sit down with that kid. And if their grades are not where they need to be, that's it. Because the parents have no access to that. They're not legally obligated to show parents at 18 or 19-year-olds grades. Parents can't even advise their kid. They won't know unless the kid says, oh, I'm failing, or oop, I changed my major twice last year. Unless they share that with somebody else, even if the parent's paying, they don't have a right to see it. So, but the college knows the kid's failing. The college knows the kid's baked every night, not showing up to class. Okay. They're just collecting the money. And to me, that is a kind of fraud that ought to be stopped. Now, should it be punished criminally? No, probably not, because proving it's going to be really hard. But I think we need to put a stop to it. And that creates a disincentive to the way they're doing it now. So suddenly when they have skin in the game, I think the whole supply demand dynamic will change. I really do. And I think it won't be long before you start seeing PR campaigns about go to trade school. It's good.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
you got to shift the incentives around. But right now, there's so much money to be made by the people even like slightly affiliated with colleges and universities. Curriculum, people who publish textbooks, these DEI training companies and all this other garbage. I mean, oh God, forget about it. Speakers charging speaking fees and all of this. It needs to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. I've actually never heard it put that way before. And funny, like right before, I asked the last question, I'm thinking, because the hardest question to me to answer, even if you fix the problem we have now moving forward, what do you do with the problem that has already happened? What do you do with all of this insurmountable student loan debt that we have already? Because that's the hardest question to answer is, okay, we fix the problem, but what happens to the people who the problem's already occurred to? And then the note that I write down is like, institutions pay it back if they can't, pay off the loan. So they have to, it'd be difficult to go, back in time and force them to do it. And especially for the federal loan, that was the exact thought that I had. But the hardest problem still to solve is what do you do about the insurmountable student loan debt that you have already? Is there a good way to answer that yet?
There isn't, but I really wish somebody would get a class action suit together to sue some of the schools.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, everybody focuses on the private. By private, I mean like a for-profit colleges, but 201, they're cheaper. They're a lot cheaper. They're a lot more efficient. They tend to have a staff. Carlin went to one. They tend to have a staff for her graduate work. They tend to have a staff who are professionals in the field doing it part-time. So they're actually working in the real world. And that's not to say they're all good, but I mean, they get a bad name. They get a bad rap. So I think the idea that these private or sort of the schools that are nonprofit should be somehow immune to any kind of action from the students is ridiculous. If the alumni can sue Harvard because they're degrading the degree they earned 30 years ago or whatever, then why can't the current students go back and say, you charged me almost 80 grand a year to go to a school that taught me nothing of any use. Like I can't get a job. My degree is worthless. People assume that I don't know anything because guess what? I don't, or whatever. Now, I don't want to relieve the student of all the responsibility, but I do want to take into account that an 18-year-old is just now legally able to contract. So you're taking somebody who is like 5 minutes into legal to make this decision, and you've got seasoned finance people. These people crunch numbers in their sleep. And don't tell me they don't know the risk they're laying on these kids when they encourage them to take these loans. It would be we knew well enough to go after the mortgage brokers who did it, right? And
Hmm.
they were talking to 30, 40, 50-year-olds sometimes and telling them, "Oh yeah, borrow 100%. You're a pizza delivery guy? Yeah, that makes total sense." Okay. We as a whole society said, no. You need to be punished for that kind of thing. You need to not be doing that. Of course, we're doing it all over again now, but whatever. But the students and the colleges are held blameless. They're completely blameless. The students aren't even looking at them. It's like, no, not my college. They're perfect, even though I'm completely useless to society after 4 years there. I work at Starbucks. And I don't mean to degrade, okay, working hard is working hard. Good for you. That's great. I'm glad people are out working because right now that's a novelty apparently.
Hmm.
But don't hold the schools blameless is my word on that.
Yeah. I think there's a little bit of blame that you have to shift to K through 12. I don't think there's any financial liability there, but outside of the obvious not preparing kids for the real world, part of preparing them for the real world is preparing them to understand what a contract between you and a university looks like, what you're doing when you sign your name to the dotted line. Because I agree with you, there's got to be some responsibility held to the student because they're the ones who wrote their name on the dotted line. But an 18-year-old, even a well-educated 18-year-old in the traditional sense, is going to have a difficult time understanding what they're getting themselves into and doing a proper risk assessment moving forward. Because what is it? Until age 25 is the first time that your brain actually fuses together. So your risk assessment
Yep.
abilities are starting to actually shape themselves. So it's really easy to get some 18-year-old to sign on for $70,000 a year to university. And so of course it's there's got to be some responsibility, personal responsibility on the kid, as bad as it seems. There's got to be a lot in the college, but I also think there's just a ton in K through 12 by not preparing them for what that looks like. All they say is this is just the next logical step, and they don't understand. I don't know really of any, and I'm sure there are, high schools and extra courses you can take before going to higher education that will kind of explain to you what your future looks like after attending college and actually breaking down those payments, what that looks like. But I don't think enough people do it. I certainly didn't get it.
No, and they're not taught math well enough. There should be okay, so here's what a responsible school would do, in my personal opinion, a responsible college. If you're sitting somebody down who says, I need to borrow 90% of this money or whatever, I'm going to have to work my way through and borrow the other 80%, whatever. I think the responsible one would sit down and say, okay, well, first step in this process is we're going to give you a math test. I'm going to just give you math. I mean, they can do that. The kid can say, no, I'm not going to take it. Okay, fine. Don't take it. Go to another school. But we want to make sure you're successful here. So we're going to give you this little math test to see if you can calculate compounded interest. Okay. We want you to understand the terms of this loan. This is kind of the first step in this process. So to make sure you understand what you're doing. This wouldn't take all that long. They could even do it electronically. Okay. Have them do that. If they completely fail it, the conversation should end. And they should be referred back to a course that they can take for a nominal fee if they want to be like, look, we'll apply your application fee to the course. How about that? We'll apply part of that to the course. It's online, so it's evergreen. They're not paying for an instructor. It just be like a little video course that takes you through educating you about how a loan works. And then you take the little course and you can retake the test. And after you retake the test, once you pass, okay, now you can sit down and occupy the time of the loan officer or the person in the financial office. And then so what I'm saying is like, this should be part of the application to college process, should be a process of ascertaining whether the applicant is ready for college. And they go like, do we want you based on your essays and your test scores and your courses you took in high school and whatever grades you got? How about the person they are sitting right in front of you right now? How about that kid? And what they're going to have to know in order to show up day one and actually be cognizant of what they're doing. I was in school with so many people their freshman year, they were drunk half the year. They either slept through class or didn't show up. And I remember having a conversation with one of my classmates in English who was like, oh, I'm like practically failing this class. And I said, well, I don't know if you've thought about it, but each of these classes is costing you $300 and some odd dollars. Like I'd done the math. Literally each session that you've skipped was that many dollars that you just spent to sleep, to do nothing. And once I put it to him that way, he was like, oh my God. Like it's like he hadn't thought about it. Okay, he got great SAT scores, straight A's in his high school, played a sport, got into the school, and was like sleepwalking his way through freshman year, not realizing there's dollars and cents connected to the minutes that you're occupying a seat or not. And so you could have a little like qualification process to make sure you understand what you're signing up for. Okay? It's, like it's not just the fine print in the bottom of the loan after you've got it all filled out, but beforehand. Then I think another thing that they could do is restructure loan. Like I said, when you said, well, how you get to the end and, they can't assess the risk. No, it's hard for anyone to even the college to assess the risk of 4 years. But if you have a meeting at the end of the first year and assess how this person is doing, are they thriving? Are they getting good grades? Or at least to have a plan to figure out how to get a tutor or whatever if they're not. Have they changed their major already more than once? Most people change it once, but have they changed it more than once? I know somebody changed it 3 times in 1 year. So you sit them down and say, I think maybe you might want to consider taking a gap year or like 6 months off or whatever. And then you can come back in good standing and so forth. And we'll just suspend this right here and you don't have to borrow the whole amount. Right? So you got a year of college. Like you said, socially, if I did a year of college and it didn't work out, Okay, but you paid for a year of college. And now when
Mhm.
you pay your loan back, you're paying for a year of college. You're not going through all 4 years and getting to the end and going, "Oh crap." Okay? So I would restructure the whole entire thing to be around reality, because we're not doing that. We are pretending these
Mhm.
students know math better than they do. We're pretending they're more mature than they are. We're pretending they have a better idea of how the world works than they do, et cetera, and so forth.
Yeah, I think so. When you brought up the math barrier to college, you already had people lighting up the comments saying math is racist, and that there's a certain truth to that kind of joke, kind of not joke. Is the problem with that is you're adding another standard, and these people are allergic to standards, and I
Mm.
think that's part of the reason why you see the modern day college the way it's going, where you can get from the same university, a medical degree and a degree in like underwater basket weaving, and it's because they're trying to equalize those standards, because they're arguing when those people get those degrees and can't find a job that they should be effectively paid just as much as a surgeon or a doctor. And it's that complete elimination of what value you're bringing to the marketplace, how useful is your skill set. That's just an additional standard that you're adding on to society that they want to eliminate. So I think their red flags, their radars going off whenever you add another standard, and that's why I think the math would get rejected immediately, because they would already argue there's going to be disparate outcomes. Another barrier to entry is the same thing as a literacy test trying to vote. I
Well,
think
and
they're
I'm
going to
sure you're
certainly use
right.
that. Yeah.
I'm sure you're right, but imagine somebody with a strong will and a spine. Like, imagine if we could reincarnate Ronald Reagan,
Mm.
okay? And somebody to stand up and say, "So what you're saying is you want an 18-year-old who's just come out of high school to borrow upwards of, $200,000 when they can't calculate compounded interest. They don't even know
Mm.
what that is at all." So that's your position. Your position is that's a good thing that we as adults should be doing and condoning. And I just want to hear the answer. I just want somebody to go, "Well, yeah, because reasons." I mean, I want to hear that. I want somebody to ask the question, like, "Tell me how that's a good idea." The cat wants to get out so badly.
I saw it in the
He's like,
background.
"Let me out, let me out."
It's rooting for it to jump up.
Um,
It's to pull down, pull
but
it
that's
down.
the problem, is there's nobody with guts enough to say, "Okay, so you're telling us racism brought barriers to entry. Okay, but what if there should be a barrier for everyone?
Mm.
What if it's like, because I actually don't think the gap would be as big as you think it would. I think there'd be very few kids who
Oh,
could
I don't think
afford it.
it'd be a big gap. I'm not making this argument. I'm just listening to this
Yeah.
argument in my head as
Yeah.
the woke scolds do their woke stuff. So, you already know the response to this kind of stuff. I think math is certainly something that I think people need to be a bit better at. But I think even, this type of, understanding compound interest and how, the actual numbers work is a bit different than understanding the impact of the numbers.
Right.
It's like when those numbers get high enough, they don't make a difference. 1 billion and 2 billion is not big difference in your head because it's just too far away and it's too big. I think a student looks at $70,000 a year, know they're going to be going there for 4 years, and like, it's too big for me to understand its impact. I'm going to get this degree.
Maybe college is not for you.
Exactly. Exactly.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Because if you don't understand the economics of having a college degree versus not having one, it isn't a social construct. I mean, people want to think that it is. Like, well, you need this piece of paper for people to respect you. If that is true, then we live in a really screwed up society. Okay, which I'm not going to argue with. We probably do, but
Yeah.
it's if you don't understand how many college degreed people there are driving Ubers and making coffee and working at Target and whatever, having to go back to school to learn something else that's a trade or some other skill, or get a totally different degree because the one they got is worthless in the economy when they got out. I mean, there are people who don't even look at, for example, accounting. Let's take accounting. It's a hard skill. Okay. And one might think, I'm going to major in accounting. I'm going to come out and be an accountant and I'll be employed. Well, you might think so. Except here's the thing about accounting. Unless you're a rock star, like, I mean, you're really, really good at it, okay? People want work experience. They don't want to hire the green, you just graduated from school with your accounting degree, or, you took your CPA. Okay, you got that, but you have literally no experience doing accounting in the real world, in a real world setting. So that just puts you in line behind all the other recently graduated accountants. And even a huge corporation hires an accounting firm, right? They don't, it's not like you need so many of them, right? And now, of course, we have big computers and different things that can do accounting. There are programs. So if you're thinking, I'm going to go be a local CPA in a small town, that's fine, but you still have to earn your chops. You still need to get experience. People aren't going to hire you. Now, people might, your mom, your dad, your friends, people might hire you,
You're
but
gonna
is
be doing
that
a
going to,
lot of taxes.
you're going to be doing a lot of taxes.
Personal
But my point
taxes,
is that going to pay your loan? So I'm all coming back to, like, it's not that it's not a valuable skill. It's not that there aren't jobs. It's that the jobs you're going to slide into right out of school, even with a skill, okay, it's not like you major in English, even with the skill, are not paying you enough to pay down your loans. They're just not. And some of them are not necessary at all. Like, I read a piece, I'm trying to think where it was. It was at Wall Street Journal recently, and it was about the new kind of loan where the colleges are encouraging students to get their bachelor's and their master's in one fell swoop. Just do it all at once, get it faster. It'll be so much better, and you can borrow the money. In fact, you can get it better terms if you borrow all of it and do all of it. So there are film students at Columbia University who are ending up with like $300,000 in debt. And they're film students. Guess who never went to film school? Steven Spielberg never went to film school. Stanley Kubrick never went to film school. I mean, like, the article pointed out that, some of the best filmmakers, most successful filmmakers ever picked up a camera and made films. They didn't go to film school. And the type of job you're going to get when you come out, it's not to say you couldn't get one or couldn't start making some little documentaries, whatever. It's just to say that you're going to be eating ramen noodles for your first 20 years out of school. And that's if you're lucky, because you probably have had to give it up before then and go do something that actually pays. So people don't understand the economics in general of school, of the country, of the profession they think they want to go into. They don't understand any of it. So I would also go back to K-12, and I would, if kids are wanting, I would start earlier. In Europe, they do this, or used to do this, where they had sort of two tracks: the pre-collegiate sort of track, and they usually decided at about 14 or so. They're like, these are the students who are obviously like they are scholars. Okay. So we're going to nudge them towards university because they're likely to be successful. Okay. And these are the students who are just, for whatever reason, they're not. I mean, not everybody is academically inclined. It's not that they're dumb. They just don't like school. Like, it's like, they're doing well enough, but that's not really their jam. So we're going to nudge them more towards, trades and things like that. So that probably saves a lot of that, because they don't have as many universities, they don't have as much space, and they pay for it. So, we can't have everybody going. But here, where you can borrow, a king's ransom to go to school, we don't, that would be taboo. Oh, it's racist. And like you said, barriers to entry, we can't do that. How are we going to have upward mobility? Well, how's that upward mobility working out for you? Person with massive debt who's driving an Uber? That's not exactly upward mobility for that college degree. Meanwhile, my stepson, who did, I think he did a little community college for welding, and then he went and became a welder and worked for the city and worked for the water and sewer department, and worked his way up there, got several promotions, and then he got hired by the railroad. He's doing welding for them. No school debt, zero school debt. He has great income. He has a skill. And, while there's some ups and downs to, like, well, where I might have to travel, I'm going to go work here, go work there.
A lot of those, you have to join a union.
Yeah, he did have to do that for this latest one for the railroad. But he's gainfully employed and has zero debt. He owns a home, etc. So, why aren't more people told that's even an option? That's why I love what Mike Rowe is doing, because he is making people aware that is an option more and more. But it's something that is more accessible, let's say, to boys and men, or so they think, right? Like welder, you don't see a lot of girls saying, not to be sexist, you just don't see it, saying, I think I'll go be a welder. But we need nurses.
There should be more female CEOs, I'm told, though.
So, yeah. But I think we need to teach kids, we need to do a better job in the K-12 of kind of having, a better sense of like who's going to go to college and who isn't, and not deciding it for them, but at least helping them, nudging them along, letting them know that these paths are equally viable, they're equally valuable. It doesn't make you a dumb person and this person a smart person. There's not a value judgment attached to it. It's just that these are things that are probably going to better suit your needs and your talents. And guess what? These guys could be making even more than these guys. It's not even about the money. It's not about upward mobility anymore at all. And so I think that, and I think nobody should graduate from any track without at least a basic class in economics. I mean, I would suggest his book, that one economics book, the one that just kind of anybody could read, pick it up and read it. And
Basic. Well, so he's got basic economics.
Yeah.
Also, the one that I always recommend is Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. That is the best intro to economics book ever.
So, I mean, imagine if every high school senior read that book, and then you put it to them like, so, want to go to college? I think the answer would be very different.
Yeah.
I think that kids are going to college because it's expected of them. And because it is what the high school diploma used to be, they're trying to make the college diploma that, because there's money in it. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
People may disagree, and that's fine.
Yeah, I actually had a funny thing about. So I have a friend who's gotten really, really woke. We used to get in arguments on social media all the time, but now I just don't engage with any of his stuff. But he always yells at me because he went to college for like 2 years, didn't pass or get a degree or anything, but he did take one economics course, like Econ 101, and he always argues with me about economics. He's very woke, Bernie Sanders kind of guy, and now he's just, I'm as nice as I can, but I'll shoot back, the Thomas Sowell, the Henry Hazlitt type of economics empirical evidence. And I said, funny thing is, I've actually never taken a formal econ course before. I've done applied economics. I have a math degree through an engineering college. So I've done applied economics, but not typically. That was more of a math class than an econ class. And he's like, oh, that just means you're not up to my level effectively. And I'm like, you took one course as a freshman, like good for you. You at least took a course, but I don't think that makes you quite the professional, and who knows who's teaching those courses. It's the problem, depending on what type of university you go to. So I know this has mostly just been a Q&A session where I'm asking you questions and you're answering them, and you're doing a great job. But we never really got to talk much about higher education before, so I really appreciate you spending the time. But I do want to leave with this last question, because I think it might be interesting how you answer it. We have a battle. We have a battle in K through 12. We also have a separate battle that I think looks a little different at higher ed. What battle should we focus on more if you had to prioritize one over the other?
Wow. Now, if I'm seeing it, if it's framed as a battle, and we're back to talking about the load-bearing structures, I probably, as a country, so not as individuals, would say the higher education piece, because we have doctor shortages, nurse shortages. We have a shortage of truly talented people in the sciences, and we have problems to solve and things to do. And people are going to be retiring and or dying. So we need some doctors, and we need some nurses, and we can't import all of them. Okay. And then the fight in K-12, I personally, me, I don't believe that it is actually a fight with anyone except yourself internally as a parent. I think the fight there is on the home front to just say, can we do it? How are we going to do it? How are we going to figure it out? Let's, work together with our neighbors. Let's solve this problem without, we can't fix it. Like throwing the towel on that one, that's not fixable. I think that higher education can be saved if we rearrange the incentives, if we start making them have skin in the game, if, but when I say that, I'm not saying that, don't hear me saying we need to pass laws, like prohibiting them from doing things or making them do things. Don't hear me saying that we have a responsibility to save the colleges. If colleges go under, but I have no problem with that. Now, you're not going to see any tears from me. I just don't see it really happening. But I do think that if there's a battle that we can fight as a people, that I would focus my attention on those credentialing. We need, because they're hurting K-12. They're the ones producing all this crap that's like raining down on us. Okay. All the research and all the data and all this nonsense that's even the journalism schools. These are the people who are creating our culture right now. So if you're forcing me to choose, I think parents, take care of your kids. That's not for the rest of us to do. Like, I'm doing it. You take care of your kids. But if there's something that, politicians and thought leaders and other people should do, is you get a lasso around academia and tell them to stop it. We got to figure out how to get them back in line, because they are really screwing up our country big time.
Yeah. I think it's definitely hard. It seems like there's a huge impact to losing both. But I do, even though I think there are better alternatives for K through 12 right now, I do think that would be, my primary goal. And also I have kids, in that area now. Right. So I'd really prefer that, I don't want the building to burn down with my children in it. Preferred.
Well, yeah, possible. But the problem is that, like, it's just not a fight that we can win. It's just can't. I mean, it is way more ingrained. It's not optional. So, like, there's just, it's not a fight that we can win. And let's say you did. Let's say you somehow magically, like, fixed K-12. Where are they going to go? What are they going to do next? What happens next? They can't all go be electricians. Okay. So, even if it's only 24% going to college, those people are going to keep sending teachers into the schools. So you're going to be like, you're paddling upstream. Like, okay, I fixed K through 5, but now they sent a bunch more teachers, because they're in a race against you. They don't want you to win. Understand that. The people in charge of the education schools are actively fighting you, Dad. They call you names. You're a racist. You're a bad person. You don't know what's best for your child. In fact, we need to ban homeschooling, says Harvard Graduate School of Education. So if they have their way, we won't even have the option for K-12. We won't be able to homeschool if those a-holes get their way. So that's where I would like to point my,
finger guns. Stick your cat on them. It's got a bunch of pent-up energy.
Poor cat. Anyway, but I mean, like I said, if you're talking, I'm framing it as a fight. That's where I put that. But I don't frame the K-12 thing as a fight. That's why.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. It's going back to the build sandbags or an arc. I think it's pretty obvious that K through 12 is an arc situation. You sail away from the existing institutions, infrastructure, and build your own. And hopefully, that controlled burn will fizzle out really fast, and that's the way to save it. It's just hard to believe that you can fix higher ed without fixing the foundation first.
Exactly.
But it's extremely difficult. You really can't focus on one, unfortunately.
Exactly. But I know you have a hard stop, so we're going to wrap up. Thank you to everybody who came tonight to listen to us talk about this subject. If you want to discuss it more, you can always show up in my locals. It's thereasonwelearn.locals.com, or head over to Kevin's. He is at engineeringpolitics.locals.com. So that's his and that's mine. And we always love to have interesting conversations with our audience. So that's it. I guess I'll see you next month, right? We do one of these a month, everybody.
Do first Wednesday of the month.
Yep. So
hopefully get prepared next time.
I think
work.
I think it was good. We needed to talk about college. It needs to be talked about more. We talked plenty about K-12. So I think this was a good idea. Next time we'll do comedy and sports.
Yes. Love them. We'll do it.
All right. Have a great evening, everybody. See you next time.
See ya.